Eaten alive by an anaconda. You won't believe why he did it. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Amazon rainforest as Michael Davidson adjusted his camera equipment, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. 20 years of wildlife conservation work had left their mark on him. Sun-weathered skin, laugh lines around his eyes, and an unwavering determination that seemed to radiate from his very being. The sounds of the jungle surrounded him, the distant call of howler monkeys, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, and the occasional splash from the nearby river, where he knew the creatures he devoted his life to studying made their home. Michael paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, his mind racing with the statistics he'd reviewed just last night. The anaconda population had declined by 60% in the last decade alone, a fact that kept him awake most nights. His research journal lay open beside him, filled with meticulous notes and observations, but also with an increasing sense of frustration. Traditional conservation methods weren't working fast enough. The world was too distracted, too overwhelmed with countless causes and endless social media feeds to notice the silent disappearance of these magnificent creatures. In his tent, surrounded by research papers and equipment, Michael pulled up the latest viewer statistics for wildlife documentaries. The numbers told a clear story. Sensational content drew attention, while traditional educational programs struggled to maintain viewership. His laptop screen flickered with emails from various networks, all expressing the same sentiment. They needed something dramatic, something unprecedented to capture the public's imagination. The idea had come to him gradually, taking shape during long nights in the field and countless conversations with his colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, who thought he'd lost his mind when he first proposed it. "Let an anaconda swallow me," he'd said over their campfire one evening, his voice steady despite the audacity of the suggestion. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of flames and the distant chorus of night insects. Sarah's initial shock had given way to a reluctant curiosity as Michael outlined his plan. He spent weeks researching similar stunts, consulting with herpetologists, and designing specialized protective gear. Each evening, he added more details to his proposal, building a comprehensive safety protocol that would protect both him and the snake. The more he developed the idea, the more convinced he became of its potential impact. His reputation in the conservation community opened doors that might have remained closed to others. Wildlife channels that had initially dismissed the idea as too risky began to show interest, especially after Michael presented them with his detailed safety measures and the potential educational value of such an event. The Discovery Channel finally agreed to fund the project, recognizing the unique opportunity to create something that would capture worldwide attention while delivering a crucial message about conservation. As Michael prepared for what would be the most daring moment of his career, he reflected on the path that had led him here. His childhood fascination with reptiles, nurtured by parents who encouraged his curiosity, had evolved into a lifelong mission to protect these misunderstood creatures. Every scale count, every habitat mapping expedition, every late-night recording session had built toward this moment, a chance to make the world stop and notice what was happening to these remarkable animals. The production team arrived over the following weeks, setting up their equipment with the precision of a military operation. Michael watched as satellite dishes, monitoring equipment, and medical stations transformed their remote camp into a high-tech outpost. Each new arrival brought both excitement and gravity to the project, reminding him of the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. During the final preparation phase, Michael spent countless hours practicing with a specially designed constriction simulator, learning to control his breathing and heart rate under pressure. The protective suit, developed by a team of engineers and herpetologists, underwent numerous modifications to ensure it would protect him while allowing the anaconda to engage naturally with what it perceived as prey. As the day of the event approached, Michael found himself spending more time alone, observing the anacondas in their natural habitat. He watched them glide through the water, their movements both powerful and graceful, their presence a testament to millions of years of evolution. In these quiet moments, his resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about creating a spectacle, it was about giving voice to creatures that couldn't speak for themselves, about shocking the world into paying attention to their rapid disappearance. With each sunset that brought him closer to the event, Michael became more certain that the risk was worth taking if it meant these magnificent animals might have a fighting chance at survival. The pre-dawn hours at base camp hummed with focused energy as Michael's team made their final preparations. Dr. Sarah Chun methodically checked the vital sign monitoring equipment for the third time that morning, her usual steady hands betraying a slight tremor. The custom-built protective suit lay on a sterilized table, its carbon fiber panels and reinforced joints gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. The suit represented months of engineering innovation, flexible enough to allow natural movement while strong enough to prevent crushing pressure on vital organs. The suit's internal temperature regulation system is fully functional, announced Marcus Rodriguez, the lead engineer, his clipboard filled with final checklist items. The emergency release mechanisms have all tested positive, and the communication system is crystal clear. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. But Michael, I need to stress again. You'll have approximately 90 seconds from the moment you signal before the suit's oxygen supply becomes compromised. Michael nodded, absorbing every detail as the team walked him through the safety protocols once more. The morning air was thick with humidity, and somewhere in the distance, a macaw's call pierced through the mechanical sounds of equipment being tested and calibrated. The medical team, led by Dr. James Morrison, a veteran of extreme sports medicine, arranged their emergency response station with practiced efficiency. Their presence was both reassuring and a stark reminder of the risks involved. "We've identified 3 potential specimens," reported Lisa Chong, the team's chief herpetologist, spreading out a detailed map marked with recent anaconda sightings. "But I'm strongly recommending we focus on the female we've been tracking in the eastern tributary. She's shown consistent behavioral patterns over the past 3 weeks, and her temperament appears more predictable than the others." Lisa's fingers traced the snake's documented movement patterns, her expertise evident in every observation she shared. The team had named the chosen anaconda Artemis, after the Greek goddess of the hunt. At 19 feet long and weighing approximately 220 pounds, she represented the perfect balance between size and manageability, if such a word could ever be applied to an anaconda. They had studied her hunting patterns meticulously, noting her preference for the deeper pools where the tributary widened and her tendency to be most active during the early morning hours. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the canopy, Michael underwent his final medical examination. Dr. Morrison checked his vitals while simultaneously briefing him on the physiological responses to expect. "Your body will naturally panic when the constriction begins," he explained, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "The key is to focus on your breathing techniques. Remember, the suit will maintain structural integrity, but you need to manage your psychological response." The film crew, a hand-picked team of wildlife documentary veterans, positioned their equipment with precision. They understood the delicate balance required, capturing every moment of this unprecedented event while maintaining enough distance to ensure safety and prevent any interference with the anaconda's natural behavior. Multiple waterproof cameras were strategically placed around the designated area, and 2 drone operators checked their equipment for the aerial footage that would provide crucial overhead perspectives. Sarah approached Michael as he began the methodical process of donning the protective suit. Her usually professional demeanor softened as she helped him adjust the various sensors that would monitor his vital signs throughout the encounter. "I still think you're crazy," she said quietly, but her voice carried an undercurrent of admiration. "But if anyone can pull this off, it's you." Her fingers moved deftly, securing connections and checking seals with the attention to detail that had made her one of the most respected researchers in the field. The suit itself was a marvel of modern engineering. Each component had been tested extensively, often to the point of failure, to ensure maximum protection. The outer layer was designed to withstand up to 300 pounds of pressure per square inch, while maintaining enough flexibility for Michael to move and signal if necessary. The inner layer contained a complex network of sensors, pressure gauges, and the emergency oxygen supply. As each piece was secured, Michael felt the weight of both the suit and the responsibility he was undertaking settle onto his shoulders. The team established their final positions as the morning progressed. Emergency response teams were stationed at strategic points along the tributary, each equipped with specialized tools for safely handling both Michael and the Anaconda if intervention became necessary. The hand signals had been rehearsed countless times. 1 flash of the UV-reflective palm strip for caution, 2 for immediate concern, and 3 for emergency extraction. Lisa's voice crackled over the radio. Artemis is in position. She's displaying typical pre-hunting behavior patterns. Conditions are optimal. The team held their breath collectively, years of preparation culminating in this moment. Michael stood at the water's edge, the weight of the protective suit barely noticeable through his focused concentration. The morning sun had risen fully now, creating dappled patterns on the water surface that could have been beautiful if not for the tension hanging in the air. Before stepping into the water, Michael took a final moment to center himself. The jungle sounds had become a distant backdrop to the pounding of his own heart. He thought of all the endangered anacondas this event might help protect, of the awareness it could raise, of the difference it might make. The water lapped at his feet, and in the distance, he could make out the subtle disturbance in the water that indicated Artemis's presence. With a final nod to his team, he began to wade in, each step measured and deliberate, moving closer to one of the most dangerous and ambitious wildlife encounters ever attempted. The camera crews tracked his movement, their lenses capturing every detail of this historic moment. Behind them, Sarah monitored the incoming vital sign data with unwavering attention, ready to detect the slightest indication of distress. As Michael moved deeper into the water, the entire team held their positions, each person acutely aware that they were about to witness something unprecedented in the field of wildlife conservation. The morning air grew heavier with anticipation, and the once noisy jungle seemed to hold its breath along with them. The water rippled around Michael's waist as he maintained his position, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. Through the crystalline depths, he could make out Artemis's massive form gliding beneath the surface, her scales catching occasional glints of sunlight that penetrated the canopy. The protective suit sensors transmitted a steady stream of data back to the monitoring station, where Sarah watched his vital signs with unwavering attention. His heart rate had elevated to 110 beats per minute, higher than baseline, but still within expected parameters for the situation. The first contact came as a whisper against his leg. Artemis's scales brushed against the suit's outer layer with the gentleness of falling leaves, a deceptive tenderness that belied the raw power coiled within her muscular form. Michael forced himself to remain still, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to move away. Years of studying anaconda behavior had taught him that sudden movements would either startle the snake into retreat or trigger an aggressive response, neither of which would serve their purpose. Through the suit's communication system, he could hear Sarah's steady voice providing updates on both his condition and the snake's behavior. Arterial pressure normal. Suit integrity at 100%. She's showing typical investigation patterns. The scientific terminology helped ground him, transforming the terrifying reality of being approached by one of nature's most powerful constrictors into a controlled research scenario. Artemis began her initial coil with fluid grace, her massive body rising from the water like a living cable. The pressure started gradually, a firm but gentle embrace that reminded Michael of his practice sessions with a constriction simulator. But as the snake's natural hunting instincts took over, the pressure intensified. The first real squeeze forced a grunt from Michael's lips, even through the protective layers of the suit. The engineering team had warned him about this moment. The transition from investigation to constriction would be the first true test of both the suit's capabilities and his own resolve. Water droplets cascaded from Artemis's scales as she established her grip, each coil perfectly positioned with the precision that millions of years of evolution had perfected. Michael found himself fascinated even through his growing discomfort, noting how her muscles rippled and flexed with each adjustment. The cameras whirred quietly in the background, capturing every moment of this unprecedented encounter. Through the suit's heads-up display, he could see his own vital signs. Oxygen levels still optimal, but his heart rate now climbing steadily as the pressure increased. "Remember your breathing exercises." Sarah's voice came through clearly, a lifeline of calm professionalism. Michael forced himself to focus on the techniques they'd practiced: slow, controlled breaths that would help manage both his oxygen consumption and his mounting anxiety. The suit creaked under the increasing pressure, but held firm, its reinforced panels distributing the force across a wider area to prevent any single point from bearing the full brunt of Artemis's strength. The world seemed to shrink to the immediate sphere of his existence, the cool water around his lower body, the increasing tightness around his torso, and the hypnotic pattern of Artemis's scales filling his field of vision. Time began to lose meaning as the snake adjusted her grip, each movement bringing new sensations of pressure and constraint. The suit's internal temperature regulation system worked overtime to combat the heat generated by both his own body and the snake's powerful muscles. Through the communication system, Michael could hear the team's measured discussions, their voices maintaining professional calm even as the situation intensified. Lisa's expert commentary provided context for Artemis's behavior, how each adjustment of her coils followed predictable patterns, how her movements suggested she was responding to the unusual nature of her prey. The scientific observations helped Michael maintain his own composure, transforming the primal fear of being constricted by a massive predator into valuable research data. The pressure continued to build, and Michael noticed the first signs of genuine distress. His breathing, despite his best efforts to maintain the practiced rhythm, began to shallow. The suit's pressure sensors reported readings approaching their upper threshold in several areas. Warning indicators flashed in his peripheral vision, their soft amber glow a reminder of the fine line they were walking between controlled experiment and potential disaster. Artemis's coils now covered most of his torso, her massive head hovering near his shoulder. Michael could see every detail of her face, the heat-sensing pits, the powerful jaw, the unblinking eyes that regarded him with primordial indifference. Despite the growing discomfort, he found himself awestruck by her beauty, the perfect adaptation of every feature. This close encounter provided insights that years of observation from a distance never could, assuming he survived to document them. The pressure reached a new threshold, and Michael felt the first real spike of panic rise in his chest. The suit was performing admirably, but the sheer power of Artemis's constriction began to make breathing a conscious effort. Each inhale required focus and determination, and each exhale seemed to give the snake more opportunity to tighten her grip. The team had warned him about this psychological barrier, the moment when the body's survival instincts would begin to override rational thought. Through the rising tension, Michael maintained enough presence of mind to observe Artemis's behavior for the research records. Her movements had taken on a rhythmic quality, each squeeze synchronized with what she likely perceived as her prey's weakening struggles. The pressure sensors in the suit recorded data that would provide unprecedented insights into the actual force exerted during constriction, valuable information for both wildlife research and the development of future protective gear. The communications channel remained active, carrying the steady stream of vital sign readings and observation notes. But Michael began to notice a subtle shift in the tone of the voices, a barely perceptible tension that suggested the situation was approaching a critical point. His own awareness started to narrow, the edges of his vision seeming to darken slightly despite the suit's oxygen supply remaining stable. The combination of physical pressure and psychological stress began to take its toll, pushing him toward a decision point that would determine the next phase of this extraordinary encounter. The realization that he was in genuine danger crept into Michael's consciousness, like ice water through his veins. The suit's pressure sensors were now flashing red in multiple zones, their warnings competing for attention in his heads-up display. Each breath became a conscious battle, his chest struggling to expand against Artemis's ever-tightening coils. The sophisticated pressure distribution system that had seemed so reliable in testing now faced its ultimate challenge against the raw, primal force of a creature perfected by millions of years of evolution. Through the fog of increasing hypoxia, Michael could hear the rising urgency in his team's voices. Sarah's typically steady tone carried an edge he'd never heard before as she reported his deteriorating vital signs. Blood oxygen saturation dropping to 89%. Heart rate elevated to 145 beats per minute. Michael, we're seeing signs of respiratory distress. The medical team stood ready at the water's edge, Their muscles tensed like coiled springs, but intervention now carried its own deadly risks. Dr. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos with clinical precision. The suit's integrity is holding, but the pressure is affecting his ability to fully inflate his lungs. We're approaching the critical decision point. The team had extensively discussed this moment in their planning sessions, but the reality proved far more complex than their simulations. A premature intervention could spook Artemis into a defensive response, potentially causing catastrophic damage to both Michael and herself. Yet every second they delayed brought Michael closer to unconsciousness. The world began to take on a dreamlike quality as Michael's oxygen-starved brain struggled to process his surroundings. Artemis's scales, once brilliantly detailed in his vision, began to blur into a hypnotic pattern of light and shadow. The suit's temperature regulation system fought a losing battle against the combined heat of his body and the massive snake's muscular exertions. Sweat trickled down his face inside the protective helmet, and he could feel his heart hammering against his ribcage like a trapped bird. His training screamed at him to give the emergency signal, 3 distinct hand movements that would bring the rescue team charging into the water. But as he attempted to raise his arm, he found that Artemis's coils had effectively pinned his upper limbs. The suit's joints, designed to maintain mobility under pressure, creaked in protest against the snake's overwhelming strength. For the first time, real fear began to overshadow his scientific curiosity. This was no longer about research or conservation, it was about survival. Lisa's voice carried over the communication system, her expertise providing crucial context even in this moment of crisis. She's displaying typical feeding constriction patterns. Each exhale triggers a tighter squeeze. It's an evolutionary response to prey's weakening condition. Under different circumstances, Michael would have been fascinated by this first-hand confirmation of their research theories. Now, this knowledge served only to underscore the direness of his situation. The team watched in tense silence as Michael's vital signs continued their dangerous decline. Sarah's fingers flew over her monitoring equipment, documenting every concerning change. Oxygen saturation now at 85%. We're seeing early signs of cyanosis in his extremities. The medical team began moving their equipment closer to the water's edge, preparing for the increasingly likely necessity of emergency intervention. Through the growing haze, Michael became aware of a new sensation, a subtle shifting in Artemis's coils that suggested she was adjusting her position for what would typically be the final phase of constriction. The pressure, already nearly unbearable, increased incrementally with each minute movement. The suit's reinforced panels groaned under the strain, and warning alerts began flashing more urgently across his visual field. Dr. Morrison's voice cut through Michael's fading consciousness with sharp authority. His CO2 levels are climbing. We need to make a decision now. The team had prepared for multiple scenarios, but the reality before them presented a horrifying dilemma. The wrong choice could result in disaster, yet indecision might prove equally fatal. Michael's vision began to tunnel, the edges darkening despite his desperate attempts to remain alert. He could still make out the massive form of Artemis wrapped around him, her scales now seeming to pulse with his increasingly labored heartbeat. The sophisticated monitoring systems in his suit continued to transmit data, telling the story of his body's struggle in cold, clinical numbers that grew more alarming with each passing second. In a moment of startling clarity that cut through his oxygen-deprived haze, Michael realized he needed to act. The hand signals they had practiced countless times were impossible in his current position, but perhaps a smaller movement might be enough. With every remaining ounce of strength, he focused on moving his right hand, just enough to trigger the UV reflective strip on his palm. The movement was barely perceptible, a mere tremor against Artemis's powerful coils, but it was all he could manage. From the shore, the team's reaction was immediate. Sarah's voice, tight with controlled panic, cut through the communication system, movement detected in right-hand monitor. Possible distress signal. The rescue team's muscles tensed, ready to launch into action, but they waited for final confirmation. One false move could spell disaster for both Michael and Artemis. Time seemed to stretch like warm taffy as Michael fought to remain conscious. The pressure around his chest had become an almost solid thing, a band of iron slowly tightening. Through the fog of hypoxia, he could hear the urgent discussions of his team, their voices seeming to come from an impossible distance. The world had narrowed to the essential act of drawing his next breath, each one a little shallower than the last. In this critical moment, suspended between intervention and disaster, Michael's years of experience with these magnificent creatures warred with his body's desperate survival instinct. Even as his consciousness began to fade, part of him marveled at the perfect efficiency of Artemis's hunting behavior, the culmination of evolutionary refinement that had made her species one of nature's most effective predators. But that academic appreciation was rapidly being overwhelmed by the primal need for air, for freedom, for survival. The rescue operation exploded into action with the synchronized precision of a well-oiled machine. Dr. Morrison's command cut through the humid air, code red, full intervention. In an instant, the previously static tableau erupted into controlled chaos. The primary rescue team, led by Marcus Rodriguez, hit the water in perfect formation, their specialized equipment glinting in the filtered sunlight. Each member had trained for months for this exact scenario, though the reality proved far more daunting than any simulation. Sarah's voice maintained its professional edge even as she rattled off increasingly concerning vital signs. Oxygen saturation critical at 82%, blood pressure dropping, heart rate irregular. Her fingers flew across the monitoring equipment, providing crucial real-time data to the rescue team as they approached. The morning air filled with the sound of splashing water and terse commands as the team moved into position around Michael and Artemis. Lisa Chong, the herpetologist, took point in the delicate operation. Her expertise would be crucial in ensuring both human and animal survived the next few minutes. Approach from the posterior segments, she directed, her voice steady despite the tension. The head is in defensive position. We need to maintain distance from her strike range while we begin unwinding. The team moved with deliberate care, their movements calculated to minimize any threat response from the massive snake. The first attempt to loosen Artemis's coils met with fierce resistance. The snake's muscles, already fully engaged in what she perceived as a hunting sequence, tensed further at the intervention. Michael's suit sensors screamed warnings as the pressure temporarily increased, and his oxygen levels dipped even lower. Through the communication system, his labored breathing came in ragged gasps, each one more shallow than the last. Rodriguez deployed the specialized pneumatic wedges, tools designed specifically for this scenario. They would have to work quickly but with extreme caution. Too much force could injure Artemis, while too little might fail to save Michael in time. Inserting primary wedge at the lower coil, he announced, his hands steady despite the stakes. Stand by for pressure reading. The device, slipped carefully between the snake's coils and Michael's suit, began providing crucial data about the constriction force they were dealing with. Dr. Morrison's medical team stood ready at the shoreline, their emergency equipment prepared for any scenario. We need to extract him within the next 60 seconds, he warned, watching Michael's vital signs continue their dangerous decline. After that, we risk permanent hypoxic damage. The urgency in his voice added another layer of tension to an already charged atmosphere. The rescue operation entered its most critical phase as the team worked to systematically release Artemis's grip. Lisa directed the careful placement of additional wedges, each one requiring precise positioning to be effective without causing harm. Watch for defensive responses, she cautioned as the snake's muscles rippled with tension. She's likely to interpret our intervention as a threat to her prey. The process of unwinding each coil felt agonizingly slow to the team, though in reality only minutes had passed since they entered the water. Every movement had to be calculated, every action precise. One wrong move could trigger a defensive response from Artemis that would make their task impossible and potentially fatal for Michael. The snake's powerful muscles fought against their efforts, her natural instincts compelling her to maintain her grip on what she perceived as prey. Sarah's monitoring station continued to provide crucial updates. Partial pressure increase in the lower thoracic region, she reported as the first wedge took effect. Minimal improvement in breathing capacity, but still critical. The team could hear Michael's struggled breathing through the communication system, each labored gasp a reminder of their dwindling time window. The breakthrough came when Rodriguez managed to fully deploy the second pneumatic wedge. "Lower coil pressure decreasing," he announced, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Beginning separation sequence. The specialized tools slowly created space between Artemis's coils, fighting against her natural constriction response. The snake's muscles trembled with effort as the team carefully worked to overcome her grip. Lisa maintained a steady stream of observations and directions, her expertise proving invaluable in reading Artemis's responses. Head movement suggesting defensive posturing, she warned as they progressed. Maintain distance from the anterior segment. The snake's behavior walked a knife's edge between hunting and defensive responses, each requiring different handling approaches. As they finally managed to create enough space to begin extracting Michael, his suit's sensors revealed the toll the experience had taken. The reinforced panels showed stress damage in multiple locations, though they had succeeded in their primary purpose of preventing lethal constriction. Michael himself was barely conscious, his responses to communications minimal and confused. The final phase of extraction required perfect coordination between team members. "On my mark," Rodriguez commanded, positioning himself to support Michael's weight. 3, 2, 1, pull. The team moved as one, carefully but firmly removing Michael from Artemis's loosened coils while others ensured the snake couldn't re-establish her grip. The water churned with their coordinated movements, the morning sun catching the spray and creating momentary rainbows in the air. Breaking free of the last coil, Michael's limp form was quickly supported by the rescue team. They moved with urgent efficiency toward the shore, where Dr. Morrison's medical team stood ready. Behind them, Lisa and her assistants remained to ensure Artemis's safe retreat, their movements careful and measured to prevent any defensive aggression from the disturbed snake. The transition from water to shore marked the shift from rescue to medical emergency. Dr. Morrison's team swarmed around Michael as soon as he was clear of the water, their practiced hands already working to remove the damaged suit and assess his condition. The morning air filled with the sound of medical terminology and equipment being deployed, each action precise and purposeful in the race to stabilize their patient. The medical tent hummed with activity as Dr. Morrison's team worked to stabilize Michael's condition. The afternoon sun filtered through the canvas, casting everything in a warm, surreal glow that contrasted sharply with the urgent atmosphere inside. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking Michael's vital signs as they slowly returned to normal ranges. His oxygen saturation had improved to 94%, though dark bruises were already beginning to form across his torso, where Artemis's coils had tested the limits of the protective suit. Sarah sat beside his cot, her laptop open to the data streams from the encounter. Despite her exhaustion, her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, documenting every detail while it remained fresh in her mind. The suit's sensors had continued recording until the very end, providing unprecedented data about the forces involved in an Anaconda's constriction. Even in the aftermath of near disaster, the scientist in her couldn't help but marvel at the wealth of information they'd gathered. The pressure readings peaked at 267 pounds per square inch, she murmured, more to herself than to Michael's semi-conscious form. "We never recorded anything close to that in our previous field studies." The data would revolutionize their understanding of anaconda hunting behavior, though she wondered now if the cost had been too high. Her friend's brush with death had shaken her professional detachment, forcing her to confront the thin line between groundbreaking research and reckless endangerment. As the afternoon wore on, Michael began to show signs of greater awareness. His first coherent words came as a whisper, barely audible above the ambient sounds of the medical equipment. "Did we get it?" The question brought a mixture of relief and exasperation to those around him. Even after nearly dying, his first thought was of the research, the mission, the larger purpose that had driven him to attempt such an audacious feat. Dr. Morrison conducted a thorough examination, his experienced hands gentle but thorough as they probed for signs of internal injury. "You're incredibly lucky," he said, his professional tone tinged with both admiration and reproach. "The suit performed beyond expectations, but you came dangerously close to severe hypoxic damage. Another 30 seconds under those conditions." He left the sentence unfinished, but its implications hung heavy in the air. Lisa arrived at the tent with preliminary observations from Artemis's post-encounter behavior. The massive snake had retreated to deeper water, but remained in the area, showing no signs of injury or unusual stress. "She's already resumed normal behavioral patterns," Lisa reported, her relief evident. The intervention protocols worked exactly as designed. No harm to the snake, though I dare say she's confused about losing such a large prey item. As evening approached, Michael's strength gradually returned, allowing him longer periods of lucid conversation. The medical team had propped him up with pillows, and a small group gathered around his cot to begin the crucial process of debriefing. Rodriguez brought in the damaged suit, laying it out on a nearby table for inspection. The reinforced panels told a story of tremendous force, with stress patterns that would provide valuable data for future designs. "The primary compression zones exceeded our theoretical models," Rodriguez explained, pointing to particularly stressed areas. "But the distribution system performed remarkably well under the circumstances. We've learned more about Anaconda constriction force from this one encounter than from years of previous research." His professional excitement was tempered by frequent glances at Michael's battered form, a reminder of the human cost of their scientific pursuit. Michael listened to these technical discussions with a new perspective, one forged in the crucible of direct experience. The academic distance that had characterized his previous research had been stripped away, replaced by an intimate understanding of the raw power and primal efficiency of these creatures. "I always understood their strength intellectually," he said, his voice still rough from the ordeal. "But experiencing it firsthand, it's something else entirely." The film crew had already begun reviewing the footage, and their preliminary reactions suggested they had captured something extraordinary. The underwater cameras had recorded the entire encounter in stunning detail, from the initial contact to the desperate rescue operation. The producer, Jenny Martinez, spoke quietly with Michael about the narrative they could craft, not just a sensational story of man versus nature, but a deeper message about respect, conservation, and the humbling power of the natural world. As night fell over the camp, the adrenaline of the day finally began to fade, leaving space for deeper reflection. Sarah found Michael awake, staring at the tent ceiling, his mind clearly processing the events of the day. "I've been thinking," he said as she sat beside him, "about how we approach conservation. Maybe the most powerful message isn't in the dramatic moments, but in showing the true nature of these creatures, their power, their perfection, their right to exist without our interference." The experience had transformed Michael's perspective on his life's work. The data they'd gathered would indeed advance their scientific understanding, but he now saw that the real value lay in the story they could tell, not one of conquest or spectacle, but of humility and respect. His close encounter with death had paradoxically given him a clearer vision of how to fight for life, both his own and that of the creatures he devoted himself to protecting. Team members drifted in and out of the medical tent throughout the evening, each bringing their own observations and reflections. Dr. Morrison continued his regular checks, noting with satisfaction that Michael's recovery was proceeding well. Lisa shared more detailed observations about Artemis's behavior, her scientific curiosity now balanced with a deeper appreciation for the risks involved in close study of such powerful predators. As the jungle night enveloped the camp in its chorus of sounds, Michael found himself experiencing these familiar noises with new awareness. Each rustle, splash, and call reminded him of the complex web of life he'd dedicated himself to protecting. His brush with death hadn't diminished his passion for conservation, but it had fundamentally altered his approach to it. The future would require a delicate balance between advancing scientific knowledge and maintaining proper respect for the dangerous beauty of the natural world. The documentary, Embrace of the Anaconda, premiered 6 months after Michael's encounter, and its impact exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Theater screens worldwide displayed the haunting underwater footage of Michael's encounter with Artemis, each frame meticulously edited to balance the raw drama of the moment with its deeper conservation message. The film opened with sunrise over the Amazon, the camera gliding over the canopy before plunging into the mysterious world beneath the water's surface where Artemis and her kind had ruled for millions of years. Social media exploded with reaction videos and discussions, but not in the way many had predicted. Instead of focusing solely on the sensational aspects of the encounter, viewers found themselves drawn into thoughtful discussions about habitat preservation and the importance of maintaining Earth's biodiversity. Clips of Michael's post-recovery interviews, where he spoke with quiet intensity about the experience of being in Artemis's embrace, resonated deeply with audiences. It wasn't about conquering or surviving, he explained in one particularly viral segment, his eyes reflecting both wisdom and humility. It was about understanding our place in nature's hierarchy. In those moments, wrapped in Artemis's coils, I wasn't a scientist or a conservationist. I was simply another creature in her world, and that perspective changed everything. The sincerity in his voice, combined with the visible marks of his encounter still healing on his body, lent his words undeniable authenticity. Conservation organizations worldwide reported unprecedented spikes in donations and volunteer applications. The documentary had transformed abstract statistics about species decline into a visceral understanding of what the world stood to lose. Universities noted increased enrollment in environmental science programs, with many applicants citing the documentary as their inspiration. Michael found his inbox flooded with messages from young people asking how they could contribute to wildlife conservation. Sarah's research paper on the data collected during the encounter was published in Nature, becoming one of the most downloaded articles in the journal's history. The pressure readings from Michael's suit had provided groundbreaking insights into anaconda hunting behavior, while the detailed footage offered unprecedented views of constriction mechanics. The scientific community buzzed with new research possibilities, though notably, no one proposed replicating Michael's close encounter methodology. The film's impact extended beyond academic and conservation circles. Local governments in anaconda habitats began implementing stricter protection measures, influenced by the surge in public interest and support. Indigenous communities, longtime stewards of these ecosystems, found their traditional knowledge and conservation practices receiving renewed attention and respect. The documentary had included several segments featuring their perspectives, highlighting the deep connection between cultural preservation and wildlife conservation. Michael's recovery period became a time of intense writing and reflection, resulting in a book that delved deeper into the psychological and philosophical implications of his experience. Living with Giants explored not just his encounter with Artemis, but the broader question of humanity's relationship with the natural world. The book became an unexpected bestseller, praised for its honest examination of fear, respect, and the humbling power of wild creatures. Speaking engagements took him around the world, but they differed markedly from his previous presentations. Gone were the dramatic calls to action and shocking statistics. Instead, Michael spoke with quiet passion about the delicate balance between scientific study and respectful distance, between human curiosity and animal sovereignty. His audiences found themselves drawn into contemplation of their own relationship with the natural world. The protective suit that had saved his life became the foundation for a new generation of wildlife research equipment. Rodriguez and his engineering team used the data from the encounter to develop less invasive monitoring systems, allowing researchers to gather crucial information while maintaining safer distances from their subjects. The technology was adapted for studying other dangerous predators, though always with an emphasis on minimal intervention. 1 year after the encounter, Michael returned to the Amazon with a small team. They located Artemis, still ruling her territory along the eastern tributary. From a respectful distance, they observed her hunting, noting how their understanding of her behavior had been transformed by the data from their encounter. The footage of this reunion, shown during the documentary's first anniversary special, captured a moment of profound connection across species lines, predator and prey, scientist and subject, each acknowledging the other's right to exist. The legacy of Michael's encounter continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Educational programs incorporated the documentary into their curricula, using it to spark discussions about conservation ethics and the responsibilities of scientific research. Art installations in major cities featured immersive experiences based on the encounter, allowing visitors to understand both the power of these ancient predators and the importance of preserving their habitats. Perhaps most significantly, The event sparked a wider conversation about the methods and ethics of wildlife conservation in the modern age. Michael became a leading voice in advocating for what he called reverential research, scientific study conducted with deep respect for animal sovereignty and natural boundaries. His near-death experience had taught him that the most powerful conservation messages come not from dramatic stunts, but from helping people understand and respect the inherent value of wildlife. As Michael stood at a podium in Stockholm, accepting a prestigious environmental award, he reflected on how far they'd come from that morning in the Amazon. "Our greatest challenge," he told the assembled audience, "isn't in protecting these creatures from direct threats, but in maintaining our sense of wonder and respect for their right to exist on their own terms. Artemis taught me that we don't need to dominate nature to understand it. Sometimes, we need to let it humble us completely." The camera crews that had captured his original encounter were long gone, but their footage continued to inspire new generations of conservationists. In universities, research labs, and field stations around the world, scientists and students approached their work with a new consciousness, balancing the pursuit of knowledge with respect for the creatures they studied. And in the Amazon, Artemis continued her ancient patterns, unaware that her encounter with a respectful intruder had helped reshape humanity's approach to wildlife conservation.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.